The quilt hit the bottom of that trash can before I even finished setting my purse down. I watched my daughter-in-law's wrist flick it in like it was spoiled meat, her diamond bracelet catching the light from the chandelier above us. 63 years old, and I have never in my life seen something I made with my own 2 hands tossed away like garbage in front of a room full of people. My name is Lois Kingsley. I've lived in Birmingham my whole life, buried a husband 3 years ago, and raised a son who I thought knew better than to marry a woman like this. The rehearsal dinner was loud. Laughter, clinking glasses, the DJ testing his speakers in the corner. Nobody but me seemed to notice what had just happened. Sabrina turned back to her champagne like she hadn't just thrown away 6 months of my evenings. My hands cramped from stitching, my eyes strained under lamplight after everybody else in this house had gone to sleep. "We only use luxury things here," she said, not even looking at me when she said it. Said it to her cousin, laughing, like I wasn't standing 3 feet away holding the gift bag it came out of. "I want to tell you, before I go further, I need you to stay with me on this one. Drop in the comments section what time you're watching this, because where I'm sitting right now, it's almost midnight, and I have not moved from this chair in over an hour." I didn't say a word to her, not one word. I walked to that trash can slow, in my good dress, in front of every person who mattered to this wedding, and I reached down and lifted my quilt back out with both hands. I didn't snatch it. I didn't cry. I folded it once, careful, the way you'd fold something that still had breath in it, and I held it against my chest, the whole walk back to my table. Emmett wasn't even looking. My son was across the room, deep in conversation with his groomsmen, completely unaware that his fiancée had just done something I will never, as long as I live, forget. I said my goodbyes early, told everybody I was tired. Sabrina didn't even glance up when I left, too busy accepting compliments on her dress, her shoes, her taste. I drove home with that quilt sitting in the passenger seat like it was a person. Didn't turn the radio on, didn't call anybody. Just drove, both hands steady on the wheel, my mind somewhere I hadn't let it go in 3 years. When I got inside, I laid it out flat across my kitchen table and I just stood there looking at it, really looking, running my fingers along the stitching, slow, like I was checking something without wanting to admit that's what I was doing. Sabrina doesn't know what she almost threw away tonight. She doesn't know. And neither does my son. I sat down in the chair across from that quilt, and for the first time in 3 years, my hands weren't steady anymore. My phone rang at 11:40 that night, and I already knew before I picked it up who it was. "Mom!" Emmett's voice sounded thin, stretched out. Sabrina told me what happened at the dinner. I sat down, slow, at my kitchen table, the quilt still spread out in front of me. "Did she now?" "She said you got real quiet. Said you walked over to the trash can yourself and picked it back up." He paused. "Said you were holding it kind of strange." I could hear Sabrina's voice somewhere behind him, still laughing, still going on about the cheap wool thing, like it was the punchline of her whole evening. She had no idea what she'd just handed my son. "Strange how?" I asked. "Like it mattered. Like—" He stopped himself. "Mom, you don't get worked up over things like that. You didn't even get worked up when Dad's truck got repossessed that one year. What was different about a quilt?" I didn't answer him right away. I let the silence sit there, because some things you don't hand over on a phone call at midnight, no matter how much somebody's asking. "Mom," his voice cracked clean down the middle. What was folded inside that quilt? There it was. The exact question I'd been waiting 3 years to hear, and dreading just as long. I laughed, not because anything was funny, but because there wasn't another sound in me that fit that moment. You'll never know, I told him, 'cause you only do luxury things. He went quiet on the other end. Dead quiet. The kind that tells you a person is turning something over in their chest, trying to figure out if they just got insulted or informed. That's not funny, he said, finally. Wasn't trying to be funny, baby. Good night. And I hung up before he could ask me anything else, because I know my son. And I know once he starts pulling on a thread, he does not stop until the whole thing unravels in his hands. I sat there afterward with my phone face down on the table, my heart going harder than I wanted to admit. 63 years old. And I still know exactly which tone in my son's voice means he's not letting something go. On his end, I imagine, the room went colder than he expected. I wasn't there for it, but I know my son, and I know what came next the second he set that phone down. Sabrina was probably still on the couch, still laughing that same laugh, still going on about how she couldn't believe grown women got attached to raggedy old blankets, like it was some kind of family heirloom instead of a fire hazard. And Emmett, my son, who has never once in his adult life raised his voice at that woman, turned around slow, phone still warm in his hand, and looked at her the way you look at somebody you're seeing clearly for the first time. She kept laughing. She had no idea the ground had just shifted under her feet. I wasn't in that living room when it happened, but Emmett told me every word of it later, and I've turned it over so many times I can see it like I was standing in the corner myself. Sabrina wouldn't let the quilt thing go, kept saying he was overreacting, that it was just a blanket, that he needed to stop being so sensitive about poor people problems. That word, poor, is the one that broke something loose in him. Poor people problems, he said back to her, flat. Like when you told my mother her greens were too heavy for your palate at Thanksgiving? Or when you called her house cute for what it is? Sabrina went quiet for a second, caught off guard. That's different, she said. Is it? Because I've been letting stuff like that slide for over a year now. The face you made when she gave us that anniversary gift, you called it quaint. Quaint, Sabrina. Like it was something you'd find at a yard sale. I was being honest. You were being cruel and calling it honest. He told me his chest felt tight the whole time he was saying it, like something he'd been carrying so long it had become normal weight. And only now, saying it out loud, did he feel how heavy it actually was. He said he had to stop talking for a second, just to breathe, because once the first grievance came out, the others started rising in him faster than he could organize them. Sabrina crossed her arms. So this is what? A pile on now? Because I said one thing about a quilt. It's not one thing. It's never been one thing. Tonight was just the one you couldn't play off as a joke. She didn't apologize. That's the part that stayed with him. She got defensive instead, said he was twisting small comments into some kind of pattern that didn't exist, said he was letting his mother's insecurities become his own. He told me that was the moment something in him went still. Quiet, in a way anger usually isn't. Not rage. Grief, almost. The slow, sinking kind that comes from realizing you've spent a year making excuses for someone. My mother, he said, voice lower now, didn't say a word to you tonight. She just picked her gift back up out of a trash can and went home. That's not insecurity. That's dignity. Something you wouldn't recognize if it introduced itself. Sabrina's face changed then. Not soft, not sorry. Harder. Wow, she said. Okay. So what, you're calling off a wedding because I don't like homemade quilts? He said he sat with that question a moment before answering, actually let himself feel the weight of what he was about to say, because some part of him still hoped she'd stop him before he said it. She didn't. I'm calling it off, he said, because I finally see who you've been the whole time, and I let myself ignore it because I wanted this to work. She laughed, short, disbelieving. Emmett, people are flying in tomorrow morning. I know. You're really doing this the night before? I'm really doing this. He told me the room went silent after that, in a way it never had between them before. Not an argument silence, but an ending one. She didn't cry right away. She just stood there, arms still crossed, like she was waiting for him to take it back. He didn't. He picked his phone back up off the counter, and the first person he thought to call wasn't a groomsman, wasn't his best man. It was me. The florist called me at 7:15 in the morning asking where to deliver 200 white peonies. And that's how I found out my son meant every word he said the night before. I hadn't even had my coffee yet. I stood in my kitchen with the phone against my ear, telling a stranger that the wedding wasn't happening. And somewhere underneath my own calm voice, I could feel my hands wanting to shake. By 9, the venue was calling. By 9:30, Sabrina's mother was calling me directly, her voice climbing higher with every sentence, wanting to know what exactly my son had done to her daughter the night before their wedding. "You'll have to ask Emmett," I told her. "It's not my place to speak for him." She didn't like that answer. Hung up without saying goodbye. Guests started arriving at the hotel by 10, suitcases still in hand, confusion turning into whispered phone calls in the lobby. I went down there myself, because somebody needed to look these people in the eye instead of leaving my son to face a room full of relatives who'd flown in from 3 states expecting cake and vows. Emmett stood near the entrance, jaw tight, saying almost nothing to anyone. Every time somebody asked him what happened, he gave the same 6 words. "The wedding's off, that's all." No explanation, no details. Just that stone face he gets from his father, the one that used to make grown men in business meetings go quiet. I watched cousins whisper behind their hands, watched Sabrina's bridesmaids cluster near the check-in desk, casting looks our way like we were the ones who'd done something wrong. Watched an aunt I hadn't seen in 6 years lean over to another woman and say, just loud enough for me to catch it. I always thought that boy could do better. I didn't respond to any of it. I've buried a husband. I've had worse said about me in worse rooms. I spent the whole morning handling what Emmett couldn't bring himself to touch. Canceling the caterer, calming down a wedding planner who kept asking about deposits, making sure the hotel didn't charge my son for rooms nobody would be sleeping in that night. Practical things. The kind of things that keep your hands busy so your mind doesn't have room to spiral. It was near noon, the lobby finally thinning out, when David Fenwick walked up to me. Reginald's old right hand at the company, a man who'd worked under my husband for near 20 years, and never once, in all that time, asked me anything more personal than how I was holding up. He wasn't holding up small talk today, either. Lois. He said my name careful, like he was choosing his words before he even opened his mouth. I know today's not the day. But I have to ask, with everything going on at the company since Reginald passed, when exactly do you plan on settling his business? The board's been asking. People need to know where things stand. I looked at him a long moment before answering, long enough that he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Reginald's business, I said, will be settled exactly when I decide it's time. Not the board's timeline. Mine. Fenwick's mouth tightened like he wanted to say more and thought better of it. I turned and walked back toward my son, leaving that question sitting in the air behind me, unanswered on purpose. 3 days after the wedding that didn't happen, my attorney's office sent out a routine notice, updating shareholder records following Garvey's passing, standard language, copied to the company's officers because that's just procedure. I didn't think twice about it when Sylvester's assistant mentioned they'd sent it. I should have thought twice. Fenwick called my house that same afternoon. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. Lois, I got a notice from your attorney's office today. Shareholder records update? His voice had that careful lightness men use when they're fishing for something. Is there a transfer happening I should know about? It's routine paperwork, David. Nothing more. Routine paperwork doesn't usually come with an attorney's letterhead 3 days after a canceled wedding. He let that sit there, waiting to see if I'd fill the silence. I didn't. I just thought of a quilt sitting folded in my hall closet, and how strange it was that the same 3 days everyone kept asking me about paperwork. The real answer was sitting a few feet from where I stood, wrapped in cotton and thread instead of legal language. Lois, I've given 20 years to that company. I think I've earned the right to know if something's changing at the top. You'll know what you need to know when there's something to tell, I said. Right now, there isn't. He didn't like that. I could hear it in the way he exhaled before he hung up. I didn't hear the rest of it until Emmett called me that evening, his voice carrying a tension I hadn't heard from him since the night the engagement ended. Fenwick had found him at the office that same afternoon, waited until the hallway cleared out, and planted himself in front of Emmett's desk like he had every right to be there. Your mother's been dodging me all week, Fenwick told him. Got a legal notice about shareholder records, and when I asked her about it straight, she gave me nothing. You know anything about this? Emmett told him he didn't, which was the truth, and that seemed to frustrate Fenwick more than a lie would have. Somebody around here ought to know something, Fenwick said. I'm not trying to make this ugly, Emmett. I'm trying to protect what's mine, what I built alongside your father for 2 decades. Nobody said anything about your position changing. Nobody's said anything at all. That's the problem. Fenwick leaned in slightly, dropping his voice like he was doing Emmett a favor by saying it quiet. Your mother's hiding something and it affects all of us. I'd think real hard about that, if I were you. Emmett told me he didn't answer right away. Said he just sat there behind his desk, feeling something cold settle into his chest that had nothing to do with Sabrina, nothing to do with the wedding. Something new, aimed at me now instead. Mom, he said on the phone that night, quieter than I expected. Is there something you're not telling me? About Dad? About the company? I closed my eyes before I answered him, thinking of that quilt again, how close he already was without knowing it. Emmett, baby. I need you to trust me a little longer. He didn't say anything for a long moment. That's what Fenwick said too, he finally said. That I shouldn't trust you blind on this. Emmett called me on a Thursday, and I knew from the first word out of his mouth that something in him had cracked that hadn't cracked before. Mom, did you know people at the office think I only got promoted because of Dad? I sat down slow at my kitchen table. Who said that to you? Nobody said it straight to my face, not until today. His voice had an edge I wasn't used to hearing from him, not anger, something closer to wounded. I was in the break room. 2 guys from logistics didn't know I'd walked in. One of them said, "Course he made regional manager. His daddy's name is on the building." Other one laughed, said, "Must be nice, not having to actually compete for it." I closed my eyes. Emmett. I've worked there 12 years, Mom. 12 years of overnight shifts when I first started. 12 years of taking calls at 2 in the morning when a shipment fell through. I earned every title I've got. His voice cracked slightly on the word earned. And now, people are acting like none of that counted for anything. It counted, I said. It's always counted. Then why does it feel like the ground's moving under me? Everybody's got questions about what's happening with this company, and the one person who could answer them won't say a word to me. I heard Fenwick in that sentence before Emmett even said his name outright, and it made something tighten low in my chest. Fenwick's been dropping little comments to the regional team, Emmett said, wondering out loud if there's restructuring coming, if certain people might be getting special treatment soon. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. I sat with that a moment. Garvey spent 20 years building trust with that man, and Fenwick was using every ounce of it now to plant doubt where doubt didn't belong. You know, I built my career the hard way, Emmett said, and this time his voice wasn't just hurt, it was pleading. So why does it feel like you're the one making people doubt that? That landed harder than anything Fenwick could have said directly to me. Emmett, nothing that's happening right now is about whether you earned your place. You built that yourself. Nobody, including your father, handed you a single day of that career. Then what is happening, Mom? Because Fenwick's out here telling people you're hiding something that affects all of us. And I'm the one standing in that building every day with no answer to give. I took a slow breath. I need you to trust me a little longer. That's not an answer. I know it's not, I said, but it's what I've got right now. He went quiet on the other end, and it was a different quiet than the one after the quilt call. Heavier, more frustrated, edged with something close to betrayal. You're asking me to defend a company I might not even fully belong in, he said finally, without telling me why. I didn't have a response ready that wouldn't break the promise I made 3 years ago, so I said nothing at all, and let that silence answer him instead. I didn't witness what happened in the Cordell house that week, but I heard about it later, in pieces, and once I had all of them, I understood exactly what had started shifting in Sabrina before she ever said a word to me. Her mother called first, according to what Emmett was told by a cousin who still spoke to Sabrina's side. Not to ask if Sabrina was okay, to ask what people would think. Do you understand how this looks? Her mother said, standing in Sabrina's kitchen with her coat still on, like she couldn't stay long enough to take it off. Half the city knows we sent out invitations. Now I have to call everyone back and explain why my daughter's engagement fell apart the night before the ceremony. Sabrina told her what Emmett had said. The pattern, the years of small comments, the quilt. Her mother waved it off before she even finished. A quilt? Sabrina? You're telling me he called off a wedding in front of everybody over a quilt. It wasn't about the quilt. It's always about something small with you people who don't know how to let things go. Her mother picked up her purse from the counter, already halfway to the door. I have calls to make. Your father's going to want to know how to handle this with the Ashworths at the club. We'll figure out damage control this weekend. Damage control. Not are you all right? Not do you need me to sit with you tonight? Her father wasn't any warmer. He called that same evening, and the first thing out of his mouth wasn't about her heart. It was about the deposit on the venue, whether they could recoup any of it, whether this would affect his standing with certain business associates who'd been invited. Sabrina sat alone in her apartment after both calls, according to what eventually came back to me, staring at a phone that had gone silent, surrounded by wedding gifts still in their boxes. Nobody in her family asking how she was actually doing underneath all of it. She told her cousin, weeks later, that it was the first time in her life she felt like an inconvenience to the people who were supposed to love her regardless. Dismissed, brushed past, reduced to a problem that needed managing instead of a person who was hurting. And somewhere in that long, quiet, humiliating week, her mind kept circling back to something she hadn't thought twice about the night it happened. The way I had walked over to that trash can myself, reached in, and lifted that quilt back out like it still had breath in it. She hadn't understood it then. She'd laughed about it, called it strange, called it dramatic. But sitting alone now, feeling exactly what it was like to be discarded by people who were supposed to value her, she couldn't stop thinking about the careful way I'd held something everyone else in that room had already decided was worthless. She didn't call Emmett. She didn't call me. She just sat with it, alone, turning that image over and over, unable to shake the feeling that she'd missed something the night she'd been so certain she was right. I didn't know Sabrina had gone looking for answers until it was already done, but she told me herself, much later, exactly how it happened. And I believed every word, because it matched everything I already knew about that week. She remembered a woman named Patrice from the office Christmas party 2 years back. Soft-spoken, worked reception, and filing for the attorney who'd handled things for our family for as long as I'd been married. Sabrina had made small talk with her that night. Nothing more, but she remembered the name, and remembered Patrice mentioning she still did occasional work for Sylvester's office. She found her number through an old company directory. Emmett still had saved from before the wedding fell apart, and she called her on a Tuesday afternoon, nerves in her throat the whole time, according to what she told me. "I don't want to put you in a bad spot," Sabrina said once Patrice picked up. I know some paperwork's been moving around since Mr. Kingsley passed, and I guess I'm trying to understand what's going on. For Emmett's sake." Patrice didn't answer right away. Sabrina said she could hear her deciding something on the other end of the line. "I really can't discuss anything about client files," Patrice said, careful. The way people talk when they're weighing loyalty against wanting to help somebody who sounds genuinely lost. Not what exists, not what changed, not even whether there's anything to discuss at all. I hope you understand. That's not me being cold. That's just not mine to speak on, in either direction. I understand. Nobody's telling Emmett anything, and it's tearing him up. I hear that. And I'm sorry he's going through it. Patrice's voice softened just slightly, though her line held firm. But I can't confirm or point you toward anything, even in pieces. If I started answering yes or no questions about what may or may not exist, that's still me discussing a client's business. I won't do that. Sabrina's chest went tight, she told me later. Not because she'd learned anything concrete, but because the sheer weight of Patrice's refusal told her something mattered enough to protect that carefully. "Is there anyone who can tell me anything?" Sabrina asked. "There's exactly one person who can decide what you're told," Patrice said, "and it isn't me. If you want answers, you'll have to go to Mrs. Kingsley directly. Whatever she chooses to share with you is hers to share, not mine." Sabrina thanked her, hung up, and sat with her phone in her lap for a long while afterward. She told me, turning over the fact that she'd learned nothing at all except how tightly this was being held. Feeling for the first time like she was standing at the edge of something much bigger than a canceled wedding or a thrown-away quilt. She didn't call Emmett that night either. She started thinking instead about how she was going to face me. Sylvester's office called me in for a meeting that Friday, said there were a few things we needed to go over regarding the transfer, and I dressed like I was walking into court, because in a way, I was. His office sat on the 4th floor of a building downtown, the kind with heavy wooden doors and diplomas lined up like armor on the wall. I'd been in that room more times than I cared to count over the last 3 years, but this time felt different, heavier. Lois. Sylvester stood when I walked in, gestured me to the chair across from his desk. "I want to go over the timeline again, make sure everything's still aligned with what Garvey wanted." "It is," I said. "Emmett's married. That condition's been met. What's left?" Sylvester opened a folder, slid a page toward me. "You already know the 90-day window Garvey built into this. The transfer has to be finalized and documents delivered within 90 days of the marriage taking place, or the shares default to a secondary provision he set up." I'd known that clause for 3 years, had read it enough times to recite it in my sleep, but hearing it out loud now, with the first wedding barely 3 weeks in the ground, it landed with a different weight than it ever had before. "What secondary provision?" I said, not a question, just a formality, since I knew that too. "If the 90 days pass without transfer, the shares convert to a trust benefiting the company's senior leadership team. Garvey wanted to make sure that if, for whatever reason, things didn't go the way he intended, The company itself would stay protected rather than sit in limbo. I sat with that a moment, doing the math in my head, though it wasn't new math. Emmett wasn't married. Not yet. The clock Garvey built into his own final wishes hadn't even started ticking, and here I was, still holding a secret that needed a wedding to unlock it. A wedding that had just fallen apart 3 weeks ago. "I know what the document says, Sylvester," I said, keeping my voice level even as my mind worked fast underneath it. "I just didn't expect to be sitting here recalculating it against a canceled wedding." "That's exactly why I called you in. I think you should know exactly what we're working against now that the timeline's been disrupted." I nodded slowly. 90 days once he remarries. Not endless time. A window, closing the moment Emmett said his vows again, if he ever did. "The transfer proceeds exactly the way Garvey wrote it," I said. "No changes, no early reveals. When the time comes, it comes on his terms." "Understood. I just wanted you sitting with the urgency of it, not just the letter of it." I left that office with something new sitting heavy in my chest. Urgency I hadn't carried in quite this way before. Fenwick was waiting for me in the parking garage. Sylvester's building shared a lot with 2 other firms downtown, and I'd learn later that Fenwick had a cousin who worked reception 2 floors below. Small enough a connection that he'd have known my car the moment it pulled in, without needing anything more than a phone call and a guess. "Lois." He fell into step beside me. "I heard you had a meeting with Sylvester's office today." "You heard correctly. I'm done waiting for you to volunteer information. I've spoken to 2 other board members. It won't be a binding vote. Those shares aren't company stock, and everyone knows it. But the board can still call for a formal accounting of anything touching this company's leadership. And enough of us are unsettled that we're going to ask for one. Publicly. Next month." "An accounting isn't authority, David." "No," he said, "but it's pressure. And pressure has a way of getting people to talk." I stopped walking and looked at him directly. "Then I suppose I'll see you there, David." He held my gaze a second longer than necessary before turning and walking off toward his car. And I stood there alone, keys in hand, feeling the weight of a clock that had just started running in a way it hadn't before. Sabrina showed up at my door on a Sunday afternoon. No warning, no phone call first. I opened it and just stood there a moment, looking at her the way you look at someone you weren't expecting to face again so soon. "Mrs. Kingsley." Her voice was smaller than I remembered it. "I know I have no right to be here, but I need to ask you something, and I couldn't ask anybody else." I didn't invite her in right away. I let her stand on that porch a moment, let her feel the weight of showing up uninvited to a house she'd never once bothered to visit before the wedding fell apart. "Come in," I said finally. She sat stiff on the edge of my couch, hands folded in her lap. None of the ease she used to carry when she thought this family owed her comfort. "I talked to someone who used to work with your attorney," she said. "I know I shouldn't have gone looking. But nobody was telling Emmett anything, and it was tearing him up, and I guess I needed to understand what I'd walked into." "And what did you find?" "Not much. Just that Mr. Kingsley changed some paperwork, near the end." She looked up at me. "After he got sick." I sat across from her, hands folded the same way hers were, and let the silence stretch before I answered. "That's true," I said. "He did." Her breath caught slightly. "Can you tell me what it was?" "No," I said. "Not yet. Not to you, and not fully to my own son either." She nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer, but hoped for something different anyway. "I keep thinking about that night," she said, quieter now. "The way you picked that quilt up out of the trash. I called it strange. I laughed about it for weeks. Her voice caught. I didn't know there was anything real behind it. I just saw an old blanket. It was never just a blanket. I know that now. She wiped at her eyes, quick, like she was embarrassed to be caught doing it. My own family barely called to check on me after everything fell apart. All they cared about was how it looked to people at the club. And I kept thinking about you, walking to that trash can in front of everyone, not caring how it looked, just caring about what was actually yours. I studied her a long moment. 3 years of carrying a secret alone, and here was the woman who'd once thrown it away, sitting in my living room finally understanding its weight, without knowing a single detail of what it held. "I'm not asking you to give me anything," she said. I needed you to know I understand now. What I did that night. What it actually cost." "Understanding isn't the same as making it right," I said, not unkind, just honest. "I know." She stood, smoothing her dress down with hands that weren't quite steady. "I just wanted you to hear it from me directly, not through Emmett." She left not long after that, and I sat alone in my living room once she'd gone, thinking about how strange it was that the woman who'd humiliated me at that dinner was now the one who understood, better than my own son did, that something sacred had been sitting in that quilt all along. Sabrina walked to her car slower than she'd walked in, already turning over in her mind what she needed to do next. Not for Emmett's sake, this time, but for mine. I didn't see Sabrina again for nearly 2 weeks after she left my house that Sunday. But she told me later how she spent those days, and I believed her, because grief and regret leave a particular kind of quiet on a person's voice. She said she couldn't stop replaying that night at the rehearsal dinner, not the version she'd told everyone afterward, laughing it off as cheap wool and dramatics, but the real version, the one she'd been too proud to actually look at when it happened. What pushed her past just remembering, she told me, was running into Emmett's Aunt Josephine at a pharmacy counter of all places 10 days after the Patrice call. Josephine hadn't been unkind, just direct, the way older women in this family tend to be. "You know," she'd said, waiting on a prescription, not even looking at Sabrina straight on, "Lois didn't raise a fuss that night. Just picked her gift up and left. That's not a woman who does things without reason. Whatever you thought you saw, baby, you didn't see all of it." Sabrina said she stood there in that pharmacy a long moment after Josephine walked off, prescription bag in hand, feeling like a stranger had just handed her the exact thought she'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. She remembered the chandelier light catching her own bracelet as she flicked that quilt into the trash without a second thought. Remembered turning back to her champagne like nothing had happened. What she hadn't let herself remember, until Josephine's words sat with her that evening, was the walk I took to that trash can. Steady, unhurried, no tears, no scene. And the exact way I'd lifted that quilt out with both hands, like it still had weight worth protecting. She told me she used to think that reaction was strange, dramatic. Sitting with it now, she understood it had never been strange at all. It had been restraint, dignity, the opposite of what she'd shown that whole night. She went through the boxes of unopened wedding gifts still stacked in her apartment that same night, she told me, and found herself staring at them differently than she had before. Not as symbols of a canceled event, but as things people had chosen with care, the way I must have chosen every stitch in that quilt. She thought about calling Patrice again, decided against it. Patrice had made clear there was nothing more to ask her, and pressing further would only be asking the woman to bend a line she'd already held firm. Whatever answers existed, Sabrina understood now only one person could give them. She thought about calling Emmett too. Decided against that as well. Not yet. Whatever she owed him, she owed it only after she'd made something right first, somewhere else. That was the night, she said. She opened her closet, pulled out the dress she'd worn to the rehearsal dinner, looked at it a long time, and folded it away for good, and decided she wasn't waiting on anyone's permission anymore to go make this right. Sabrina called first this time, said she needed 15 minutes, nothing more, and I told her to come by that Thursday evening. She stood on my porch a little steadier than she had the first time, though her hands were still restless at her sides. "I did something before I came here," she said, once she was seated across from me. "I need you to know that, before anything else." "Go on." "My mother called again this week, still trying to control how this looks to people at the club. And I told her, for the first time in my life, that I didn't care how it looked. I told her what actually happened, that I threw away a woman's handmade gift and called it garbage in front of a room full of people, and that the wedding didn't fall apart because of Emmett being sensitive. It fell apart because of me. I studied her, saying nothing yet. "She didn't take it well," Sabrina continued. "Told me I was airing family business, making myself look worse than I needed to. I told her that was fine. I meant it." "That took something," I said. "It took longer than it should have." She looked down at her hands. "Mrs. Kingsley, I didn't come here tonight to ask you for anything. I came to say I'm sorry, not just for the quilt, for what I was, that whole night, and probably long before it. The way I looked at things that didn't have a price tag on them. The way I looked at people who didn't spend money the way my family does. I dismissed you because it was easier than actually seeing you." Her voice caught, but she kept going. "I don't expect you to forgive me tonight. I just needed you to hear it directly, and I needed it to cost me something to say it. Not just be words I picked because they sounded right." I let the silence sit a long moment, the way I do when something matters too much to rush past. "An apology doesn't unthrow a thing," I said finally. "It doesn't put that quilt back in your hands the way it was before you decided it was worthless. It doesn't undo the look on my son's face that night, or the months since." I paused. "But it's a start." She nodded, eyes wet, not wiping them away this time. "That's more than I thought I'd get," she said quietly. "I didn't say you'd gotten everything," I said. "I said it's a start. There's a difference." She almost smiled at that. Small, careful, like she understood exactly the weight of what I meant. We sat a while longer, quieter now, the kind of quiet that isn't uncomfortable once the hardest thing has already been said. "Sabrina," I said, before she could stand to leave, "there's something Emmett doesn't know yet either. Something bigger than either of you understand right now." Her eyes came up sharp, searching my face for more. "I'm not ready to say what it is," I said, "but I think it's time both of you start preparing yourselves for it." She sat back down slowly, the question written plain across her face, though she didn't ask it out loud. The board meeting was set for 10 o'clock on a Monday, and I walked into that conference room wearing the same steady face I'd worn the night I lifted that quilt out of the trash. Sylvester walked in beside me, folder in hand. Emmett was already seated near the far end of the table. He'd insisted on being there once he heard what Fenwick had put on the agenda: clarification of estate-related share activity. Fenwick stood as we entered, buttoning his jacket, looking more confident than the situation should have allowed him to feel. "Thank you all for making time," he said to the room. 7 board members seated around that long table. "I've raised concerns for weeks now about unexplained activity involving Reginald's, Garvey's, shares. Mrs. Kingsley has declined to clarify anything directly, and I think this board deserves transparency before any transfer is finalized without our knowledge. A few heads nodded around the table. Fenwick had clearly done his groundwork before today. I'd like Mrs. Kingsley to explain formally what's being planned, he continued, and whether this company's leadership had any say in it. All eyes turned to me. I didn't stand right away. I let the silence hold a moment, the way I always do when something needs weight behind it. David's concerns aren't unreasonable, I said finally. He's given this company 20 years, and he deserves clarity. So I'll give it to him, and to all of you, plainly. I could have said this weeks ago and spared myself these meetings. I didn't, because the moment I said the word shares out loud in a room like this, my son would have heard it from someone other than me first. That was never a risk I was willing to take with him. Sylvester opened his folder and slid copies across the table. My husband's will, I said, included a provision regarding his personal shares, drafted and notarized after his diagnosis, while he was of full legal capacity. Those shares were left to me outright, with a personal instruction, not a legal obligation, but his wish, that I transfer them to our son once he was married, as a mark of the life Garvey wanted for him. I let that settle before continuing. That provision does not require board approval. It was never company stock in the operational sense. It was Garvey's personal holding, his to leave as he chose. Sylvester can confirm the legal standing of that document for anyone who wants to review it. Sylvester nodded, calm, professional. The will is airtight. Mrs. Kingsley has acted entirely within her rights and within the timeline her husband specified. Fenwick's jaw tightened. And the secrecy? Weeks of dodged questions planted doubt about who's earned what around here. The secrecy, I said, cutting in without raising my voice, was mine to keep, David, because it was never yours to know before I was ready to tell it. You've spent weeks implying my son didn't earn his position here. He built that career with his own hands, long before any of this paperwork existed. Perhaps instead of chasing shares that were never operational company stock, you should have spent that energy asking why you needed to tear down a man who's given this company 12 honest years. The room went silent. A few board members exchanged glances. Fenwick opened his mouth, found nothing solid to say, and closed it again. I believe, one of the older board members said carefully, this matter is resolved. Mrs. Kingsley has acted within her rights. Fenwick sat back down without another word, and I watched something in him deflate, publicly. In front of the room, he'd tried to turn against me. I glanced toward Emmett. He was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Not his mother softened by grief, but someone who had been holding the line the entire time, alone, and had just proven it in front of everyone who doubted her. Emmett came by my house 2 days after the board meeting, sat at my kitchen table where the quilt had once lain spread out, and told me he wanted to talk about Sabrina. She's different, he said. I don't just mean sorry. I mean, she confronted her own mother, told her the truth about what happened, didn't care how it made the family look. That's not the woman who threw your quilt in a trash can. People can change, I said, but trust isn't rebuilt on words alone. I know. I'm not just taking her word for it this time. He told me about a Sunday not long after, when they'd stopped by his cousin Tanya's place unannounced to drop off something for her kids. Tanya lived modest, a small rented duplex on the east side, toys scattered across a worn carpet, nothing polished about it. The old Sabrina, Emmett said, would have made some comment on the drive over, something about the neighborhood or the size of the place, dressed up as a joke. This time, she didn't say a word about any of that. Instead, she knelt down on that worn carpet in her nice clothes and spent 20 minutes helping Tanya's daughter with a puzzle, laughing with her, asking her questions like the kids' answers actually mattered. Tanya pulled Emmett aside before they left and told him, "Quiet, your girl's all right. She didn't look around my house once like she was doing me a favor being here." Emmett said that stayed with him longer than any apology could have. Not because it was staged for him to see, but because it wasn't. She hadn't known he was watching that closely. She was just being someone different than she used to be, in a room where nothing was on display. They started spending time together again slowly after that. Careful, no rush toward the altar, this time. He kept watching, not to catch her failing, but because he genuinely wanted to believe what he was seeing was real. It held, week after week, in rooms where nobody important was watching. 3 months after the board meeting, Emmett told me they'd decided to marry again. Quietly this time, no 200 guests, no peonies flown in from 3 states over. A small ceremony at the courthouse, followed by dinner at my house. Just family. The day came faster than I expected. I stood in my own living room, dressed simple, watching my son take Sabrina's hand in front of a small gathering of people who actually mattered. No performance, no appearances to manage. Sabrina wore a dress she'd chosen herself this time, nothing borrowed from magazines or expectations. She looked at Emmett the way I hadn't seen her look at him before. Steady, unguarded. After the vows, after the modest dinner, after most of the guests had gone home, Sabrina came and found me in the kitchen while I was putting away dishes. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me a chance to be different." "You did that yourself," I told her. "I just didn't slam a door in your face while you figured it out." She hugged me then, brief, sincere, and went to find my son. I watched them leave together that evening, hand in hand, lighter than I'd seen either of them in months, and something in my chest finally settled after 3 years of carrying a promise alone. Before Emmett walked out the door behind her, I caught his arm gently. "Come by the house alone tomorrow," I said. "Just you. There's something your father wanted you to have, and it's time." He studied my face a long moment, searching for more, but I didn't give him anything else. "Tomorrow," I said again, and let him go. Emmett came alone the next morning, just as I asked, still wearing the quiet glow of a man who'd married the right way this time. No chaos, no trash cans, no whispered judgment in a hotel lobby. I had the quilt spread across my kitchen table when he walked in, the same table where it had lain the night Sabrina first threw it away. "Sit down," I said. He sat, studying the quilt like he was seeing it for the first time. Really seeing it, not just the fabric, but the object itself, the thing that had cost him a canceled wedding and months of unanswered questions. I picked up a small pair of scissors and, carefully, opened a seam along the edge I'd sewn shut myself 3 years earlier. Emmett watched, silent, as I drew out a flat metal key and a folded letter, worn soft at the creases from years of sitting against fabric instead of paper. "Your father wrote this the year he got sick," I said, sliding both across the table to him. "He made me promise not to give it to you until you were married. Truly married. Not just standing at an altar." Emmett's hands weren't steady when he picked up the letter. He looked at me once, like he was asking permission, and I nodded. He read it alone at that table, while I stood at the counter with my back half turned, giving him what privacy I could in my own kitchen. I heard him exhale hard partway through, heard him stop reading once and just sit there, letter trembling slightly in his hands, before he kept going. When he finished, he sat still for a long moment. "He said he was sorry," Emmett said finally, voice thick. "For all of it. The missed birthdays, the Sunday dinners he worked through. He said," his voice caught. "He said watching me build my own career, on my own, was the only thing he did right by me, even though he did it for the wrong reasons at the time. And he didn't want to hand me anything until I built something he never managed to. A real marriage. A real home. That's the key to a safe deposit box downtown, I said. His shares in the company, left to me, meant for you, the day you built the life he couldn't. Emmett looked at the key in his palm like it weighed more than metal should. Sabrina, who'd been waiting quietly in the next room, stepped into the doorway. Emmett waved her over, and she came, standing beside his chair, reading the letter over his shoulder with her hand resting on him. I watched her face change as she read. Watched her arrive, finally, fully, at the moment she'd almost destroyed without ever knowing what it held. "This was in there," she said quietly, "the whole time, while I was calling it cheap wool." "It was," I said, "not cruel, just true." She didn't defend herself this time. She just reached over and took Emmett's hand, and the two of them sat there together, letter between them, key catching the morning light from my kitchen window. I stood back and watched my son hold his father's grief and grace in the same two hands, watched the woman who'd once thrown away something sacred finally understand its full weight. Some things aren't hidden to keep you out. They're hidden until you're ready to hold them right.